Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and now most of the new bikes for 2024 have been announced. We've had EICMA, we've had Motorcycle Live in the UK, and so we've got a really good idea of what the new options will be for the next model year. So in this video we're tackling the sports bikes with 17 of our favourite picks, and we'll go in price order ascending, and naturally with it being the sports bikes things do get rather spendy towards the end. But first up we'll kick off with something that should be relatively affordable, and that's the new Tornadoes, which come in a 300, 400 or 500 variety. Now all of them use parallel twins, but the 300 of course is the smallest. That bike makes around 35 horsepower, whereas both the 400 and 500 make the maximum legal 47 horsepower for A2 license holders. It is worth pointing out though that the 500 makes a smidge more peak torque, owing to the fact that it's the one that's got the bigger engine. In fact, it has to be said that the 500 is easily the most tricked out when it comes to the premium components. It's got an upside down fork from Marzocchi, it's got brakes from Brembo, but I have to say, on looks at least, it's the 400 that takes it by a country mile. The paint job to me looks excellent and has a little bit of MV Agusta about it. And then also you've got the rear wheel with the single-sided swing arm that looks almost like it came straight off a Ducati Diavel V4. Now yes, they're made in China, so that's how they build them down to a price, but the swish looks, I think, are up to scratch for the Italian brand on the tank. Now another option at this end of the market is the new Aprilia RS457, and in many ways it's not dissimilar to the Benellis. You see, it also uses a parallel twin, this time 457cc, as you may well have already deduced, and also it gets an Italian brand on the tank, yet it's built out in their Indian facility to help keep the cost of production down and also distribute it to Asian markets where smaller capacity bikes are typically more popular. Now I would expect this one to come in a little bit more pricey than the Benellis because the Aprilia brand does have a little more pizzazz, and also it gets some of the looks of its larger siblings like the RS660 or the RS-V4 Superbike, just in a 47 horsepower learner friendly package. It does look pretty slender as well at 159 kilograms dry. There's a TFT dash with some decent tech, and the hardware looks reasonable with the bi-brake brakes and a preload adjustable upside down fork. So all in all, definitely looking forward to taking one of these for a spin. Other new 2024 options at this sort of price point include the mildly updated Kawasaki Ninja 500, which was previously known as the Ninja 400. You see, it gets a little bit of a facelift as well as the extra capacity reflected in the name, but given that there's only so far that you can go with an A2 legal bike in terms of power, there's no huge performance bump at the top, but rather a bit of a lift in mid-range torque with an extra 5 Newton meters. Also, it's worth adding that the peak power figure is moved 1000 RPM lower in the rev range, which should make it a little easier to access. The other bike that you may well consider is the Honda CBR 500R, which has to be said is a rather good looking bike, especially in this red, blue and white paint job that does give it more than a hint of the Fireblade. Tweaks for 2024 include a new TFT display, new fuel injection settings and new traction control. So some nice little bonuses if you are already considering buying one, but I will say the big downside with this bike is that it does come in rather heavy at around 191 kilograms when fully fueled up. That's nearly 20 kilograms up on the Ninja 500 for example, and while my experience of the previous generation was still pretty good, it's still a nice bike to ride, surely of the two, and the Aprilia, it's going to feel the least peppy. Now another 1500 quid more will get you something completely different in the form of Kawasaki's new Ninja E1 Electric. Now despite the Ninja name, it's hardly going to blow your mind in terms of acceleration. It only makes around 12 horsepower peak, but in their defense it's not really built to be a track ready superbike, but more so a slightly upright but sporty looking city commuter. Range is also quite limited, which supports that theory, and so if you do like the green idea but perhaps want to go a little bit further afield, then you might want to also consider its hybrid equivalent. This Ninja 7 HEV is a first, I believe, for the motorcycle market, and so you've got to take your hat off to Kawasaki for achieving something that's quite technically impressive, with a bike that blends the power of a 500 parallel twin similar to the one you'll find in the Ninja 500, with a battery and motor that's reasonably similar, I believe, to the one you'll find in the Ninja E1. Now the result, they claim, is actually a bike that's pretty quick. They say say that acceleration from a standing start is comparable to a 1000cc sports bike, all at the same time as delivering a fuel economy that's comparable with a 250. The big downside though is the price, which is expected to come in around the £12,000 mark. Now before we get on to the next bike, I'd just like to take this chance to say a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Insta360. We use the X3 360 camera to capture pretty much all of the riding footage on the channel, and I've got to say it's been an absolute game changer in terms of making it fun and easy to film our rides. You see, the awesome thing about 360 cameras is you can mount them pretty much anywhere on the bike, and you don't really need to worry about them being level or getting the framing right. You see, once you've finished your ride or even just pulled over for a break, you can pair with the Insta360 app, and that's where you can choose different crops like landscape or portrait. You can export footage facing forwards or backwards or up or down or any level of zoom, and so it's genuinely a joy to use, and I always have mine in my bag to make it super simple to capture and share my rides, and I fully recommend it to you too. So do check out the description down below to pick up yours, and you'll also find a link down there specifically for my viewers that will get you a free motorcycle bundle with every X3 purchase. So once again, a massive thanks to Insta360 for their support, and with that, on to the next bike. Now a bit of a step up from the small to mid capacity bikes, we've got the CBR 650R, which makes around 94 horsepower from its 650 inline 4. Now this bike has been around for some time, and it does represent a nice option if you want something relatively comfortable and also affordable, but with the authentic sports bike feel of that 4-cylinder engine. And for 2024, it gets some neat tweaks like a new TFT display to keep it competitive with some of the other options on the market. But thing is, it does have a bit of a trick up its sleeve, and that's their new e-clutch system, which Honda unveiled a couple of months back. Basically, the idea is that you can pull away and come to a stop without having to operate the clutch lever, and so effectively it's twist and go. Also, you don't need to use the clutch to shift up and down, but the lever is still there in case you want to slip it to help with riding at low speeds or things like that. Otherwise though, you can pretty much ride clutch free, and so it sounds awesome to me if you do a lot of stop-start traffic where feathering the clutch a lot can be a little bit of a snore. That said, I'm not sure that's the true intended purpose of a sports bike, and so maybe this system is more suited to the naked equivalent on which it's also available, which is the CB650R. Now it has to be said, it felt like there's been a few years where there's been fewer and fewer sports bikes on the market, but it does feel like things are back on the up in 2024, and one of the bikes that's leading the way is the new Kawasaki ZX4RR. You see, we haven't really had many small capacity inline 4s since way back in the 90s, but Kawasaki for some reason decided to bring it back, and I think it's a glorious thing. Now being a 400, it tops out at around 75 horsepower, so realistically it's a competitor for bikes like the Yamaha R7 or the Honda CBR 650R that we just mentioned, but what sets this one apart is the fact that it achieves that peak power right up at 14,500 RPM, which gives it this beautiful singing note at the exhaust. We've got one of these lined up for review in early 2024, so absolutely cannot wait to tell you what it's like out on the road. The other option that you might want to consider if you're looking for this sort of affordable middleweight is the new GSX-8R from Suzuki. Effectively, this is a faired version of their GSX-8S Naked. Also, you get the slightly lower clip-on style bars, and while the peak power figure of around 80 horses might not look quite as exciting as something like the Honda, it's actually really impressive in the mid-range. It's got loads of grunt and also a very nicely implemented throttle that really does balance smoothness with fun really very well. That's certainly what I found when I rode the GSX-8S anyway, and so I'm very much looking forward to this one, and would also encourage you not to overlook it if you're lining up a few middleweight sports bikes to test ride. I've also got to say I really do like the Suzuki design of their TFT displays. They've got a very simple approach which makes them really easy to understand and use, and although I know that stacked headlights are not to everyone's taste, I actually think they did a great job on the styling for this one, and it makes for one of the most attractive bikes in this segment. Now another sign I think that the sports bike market is improving is with the reintroduction of some of the 600 super sports, and we'll start with the Kawasaki ZX-6R. Now you could think of this as a slightly bigger sibling to the 400 we just looked at, and so you get much more peak power at just over 120 horses. For 2024 it also gets some nice little tweaks like a new TFT display and also a new styling styling package that pulls the front end much more in line with the other bikes in the Ninja lineup. Otherwise, it does have a lot in common with the previous generation, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and it does all come in around the £10,500 mark, which makes it look very tempting versus some of the more serious but expensive bikes later on this list. Again, we've got one of these lined up pretty soon, so do keep your eyes peeled for a full review. Now that all said, you might not want to rush out and put a deposit on one straight away, because another 600 legend is making a return for the new model year, and that's the Honda CBR 600RR. Now, like the Kawasaki, this one fell foul of emissions regulations a few years back, but they have been selling this updated version in Asia, and so for some reason have decided to bring it back to the UK and Europe for 2024. Now again, like the CBR 500 and 650, this one gets some of the looks of the full fat Fireblade, and so definitely one of the better looking bikes at this capacity, and I also think the underseat exhaust finishes the rear end off quite nicely. 2024 improvements include a new TFT display with track-friendly layouts, longer forelegs for more adjustability in terms of the geometry, and also a new fuel tank cover that's 10mm lower to allow the rider to get into a tighter tuck. And so it all sounds quite serious and performance orientated, and therefore this could be one more so for the track fiends than the road riders. Over to Yamaha now, and while the origins of this bike aren't strictly a sports bike, once you've added all the bits, it pretty much does the same job. You see, the basis of this model is the XSR 900 Retro, which in itself is based upon the MT-09 Naked, just with a more old school, late 80s or early 90s inspired styling package. But for 2024, they're now offering it with a half fairing and calling it the GP edition, and it also gets slightly lower handlebars and the updated TFT dash from the new 2024 version of the MT-09. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll also find fairing lowers in the accessories catalogue, and so this is pretty much the closest thing you can buy to the long-rumoured R9 that they're expected to be working on. Personally, I absolutely love the way this bike looks, and it should go pretty well too, with that brilliant CP3 inline triple making just shy of 120 horsepower and a heck of a noise at the exhaust. Also, a great looking bike, and one that I really enjoyed checking out at EICMA this year, is the new Corsaro Sport 750 from Moto Morini. Now this bike uses a new 750cc V-twin, which is said to make just shy of 95 horsepower, and it's built around a very interesting looking chassis which has a frame partly made from steel trellis and partly made from aluminium. It definitely adds something to the looks, which it has to be said are striking, and also the hardware looks to be decent with components from the likes of Brembo and Pirelli. I guess the only stumbling block could be the price, of which there's no word as of yet, but I guess it'd want to be somewhere around the 13 to 15 grand mark to make it a competitor for something like the Ducati Supersport 950. Now at number 13, we've got the Kawasaki ZX-10R and ZX-10RR, both of which now come in a 40th anniversary paint job for the 2024 model year to celebrate the birth of the Ninja sub-brand. Now the ZX-10R comes in a green, white and blue finish, and I think you can get the ZX-6R and ZX-4RR in this finish as well, but the ZX-10RR, at least in the UK anyway, has a choice of three very special looking paint schemes. One is similar to the R model but with a slightly more pop-in purple and pink Kawasaki logo, then another is green, white and red with the same logos, and then the last is my pick of the bunch, which is the purple, pink and black version, which really does stand out from the crowd. Now only 40 of these bikes will ever be made, and each customer will be able to take their pick from those three paint options, and also you'll get a plate mounted on the top yoke which will feature the limited edition number of the bike. Absolutely stunning in my opinion, but of course the catch is the price, which I believe to be £26,599 for this RR edition. On the other hand, the standard R model, still in the very nice looking 40th anniversary paint job, is just £17,849, and so perhaps that's the one to go for if you're on a bit of a budget. Also seen in a major milestone is the Suzuki Hayabusa with a 25th anniversary edition, and again you've got a very bright and colourful paint job with an almost neon orange and black. But I've got to say, I'm very much digging this one as well, and I massively prefer it to the standard white version of the Hayabusa, plus it's only pretty much 400 quid extra, which makes it sound all the more tempting. Now the Busa still stands up as an awesome bike to ride for me, despite the fact that there's no technical or performance updates for this this year because you've just got so much guts and grunt to that big 1300 inline 4, and also a cushy ride that makes it one of the quickest ways to cover miles in comfort. Now we're getting towards the sharp end of this list now, and we're up over 20 grand, and that's with an update to Honda's CBR 1000 RRR-SP Fireblade. Now externally it might look pretty similar, but actually on the inside there are tweaks to many parts of the bike, including the engine, the frame, the suspension, there's new brakes, new aerodynamics, a new bigger fuel tank, and also some updates to the electronics. So it's really a comprehensive review looking absolutely everywhere for that extra little bit of performance. And on top of that, there's now a carbon edition limited to 300 models that gets super lightweight bodywork and a very stealthy looking black finish. Certainly looks quite special to me, but I don't think it can quite match this absolute stone cold stunner from Ducati. This one is the Panigale V4 SP2 30th Anniversary 916 edition, and indeed it has been built to celebrate 30 years since the launch of one of the most iconic motorcycles ever made. So not only do you get the SP2 underneath it, which is basically a super spec version of the Panigale V4 with carbon wheels and a dry clutch and all of the top spec track focused equipment like a data analyzer and carbon brake ducts and mirror and license plate blanks, but it's also finished off with this dedicated paint job that harks back to Carl Fogarty's World Superbike winning 996 of 1999. Now just 500 will be made, and naturally the price is steep at a smidge over £37,000. Thing is, it can't quite top the list, and if you watched our roundup of the naked bikes, you'll remember there was quite a jump up to the Norton V4CR in its 588 edition that celebrates 125 years of the Norton name. That bike, the naked, comes in at just under 50 grand, but this sports bike equivalent, the V4SV, comes in just over. So I think it's fair to say that this one is strictly for collectors only, but I can still admire it for this particular paint job that's inspired by the rotary Norton racers of the 80s and 90s. And with that, it rounds off our list of the best new and updated sports bikes for 2024. And so as always, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick down in the comments below, so do let me know. Also, if you haven't seen that list of the nakeds, then I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. And do hit subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.